At some point in time, we all have to deal with death and loss. On today's episode, we're going to talk about loss, grief, and the importance of having a strong support system to get you through such a difficult process. Hi, welcome to Health Journeys, a podcast about real human experiences in health and medicine. I am your host and healthcare advocate, Maritza Hasty. Health Journeys is all about discussing the diagnosis and treatments of diseases and exploring personal stories in pursuit of overall health and well-being from different points of view. Support for this podcast comes from Hasty Storytelling. Hasty Storytelling is a creative agency that specializes in production, brand strategy, and live streaming solutions. For more information, visit us at hastystorytelling.com. Today we're going to discuss loss, grief, and the importance of having a strong support system to get you through that process. Our guest today is Fox 11's Maria Quiban-Whitesell, co-author of the book You Can't Do It Alone, A Widow's Journey Through Loss, Grief, and Life After. Welcome, Maria, to our show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Maria, I know that a lot of people recognize you from Good Day LA's weather report, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background?
Well, I have been doing the weather here in Los Angeles for Good Day LA for almost 20 years. It's been a long time, and I'm originally from Honolulu, from Hawaii. I was born in Cebu City in the Philippines, and my family immigrated to Hawaii when I was about almost 10 years old, and then eventually moved out here to Los Angeles to be closer to my parents who moved away, and of course to pursue my career in broadcast television and journalism.
Very good. Okay. So as I said, a lot of people know you, but for those listeners that wanted to get a little bit more background, we appreciate you sharing that with us. So Maria, the purpose of your book, let's focus in on why you wrote the book. And of course, we know that you lost your husband, Sean, to a very rare form of cancer. But before we get there, I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about Sean, how you met, and a little bit about your life with Sean.
Well, when I met Sean, I was really well into my career. I had been a divorced single mom for a while. My older son was 16. And so I was at a point in my life where I was happy where I was. I didn't need to be married again. I was well into my job. I was really enjoying this point in my life. And when I met Sean, it was kind of happenstance. It was sort of kind of a setup between my colleague and her boyfriend at the time. They were having a big dinner party and they invited me at the last minute, and I didn't want to go because I'd heard it was just couples going to this dinner, but they made me go. And I guess it was sort of a setup because they also knew that Patrick's brother Sean was going to be there. And so I remember towards the end of this dinner, in walks Sean with the rest of their family. So actually that night I met not just Sean, but his entire family. And as soon as we met, there was something there because I remember how we just clicked instantly. We just chatted for the rest of the evening, and we were kind of inseparable after that. Actually, we went on our first date a couple of weeks later, and we were pretty much together after that.
Wow. So it really did click from the very beginning. So tell me a little bit about when you got married. What was married life like at the beginning? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we had both married later in life. He had never been married before. He didn't have any children. And so he wanted all of that. And I was very happy to be able to do that with him. And we were really in love. And to extend our love, we wanted to try to have a baby, and we realized that it was going to be a difficult thing. And but we managed to do it. And so we had Gus. I was 42. He was, I don't even remember now, but he was a little bit older, and he worried about that being older parents. But we were healthy. He was healthy, actually, very healthy. And we were just having the time of our lives. My older son had moved on. He was married and was starting his own little family. And so here was Sean and I and Gus, and just enjoying our happily ever after.
What a wonderful, it sounds like such a wonderful love story. So now that you were married and you decided to discuss to start a family and it happens, tell us about what happened the moment that you found out Sean was sick. How did that come about? And if you could tell us the story of the diagnosis so that our listeners can understand you're this happy family and everything seems great and wonderful, you're in love, and now you're faced with this situation.
Well, what happened was Sean had just turned 50 years old. And so all of his brothers would celebrate the big 5-0 with a huge celebration. So, as a gift for Sean, they all got him, really both of us, this amazing trip to Paris. And we had both never been to Paris. And so it was our first trip together in a long time. Gus was 3 at the time. So we thought it was a good time to go that far away without him. My parents came to stay with him. And so we went on this trip together, and leading up to that trip, we were both working so hard, and he had just started a new show. And so when we got to Paris, I realized that there were all of these things that he was doing that was so out of character. Suddenly I realized how forgetful he was, beyond normal. He was having difficulty understanding how to get a cab even. And this was a guy who lived in New York City. And so that was so difficult to see him struggle with that. And every day that we were there, I realized that seemed to get worse. He wanted to take naps. He didn't plan out our itinerary like he usually would. And so every day we were there, I got more and more worried. And even to the point of tears towards the end of our trip. And I made him promise to go see a doctor as soon as we got back. And he actually didn't fight me on that, because he himself realized that there was something going on. And so by the time we got back from our trip and I helped him make some appointments, it was exactly 2 weeks later that we were called in after he got an MRI, and we saw the tumors that were in his brain.
Wow. So it sounds like the symptoms were pretty rapid. So, or as you think back, I mean, it seems like it all happened during this trip. They were manifesting themselves more and more. So what would you say was the period of time then, from the time that he was functioning normal till that time when you both decided we better get in there to see what's going on? How long did that take?
Well, that's the thing about brain cancer, and the thing about glioblastoma is that depending on where that tumor grows in the brain, it can bring on different deficits. For Sean, we really didn't notice anything too much. In hindsight now, we looked back on that previous year and a half, and we can actually kind of trace some of the odd behavior he had been displaying to perhaps that was when those tumors were actually growing. But we justified a lot of that. You know, we talked about how he was turning 50 that year. And so we thought, oh, it was probably just anxiety related to that, or the new job he was starting, or the longer hours he was putting in as a writer. And we could justify some of those behaviors, the forgetfulness or the fatigue, to that. And so we didn't really think too much of it at the time, but at diagnosis, it all kind of made sense when he was diagnosed with glioblastoma, which is an incurable, very highly malignant cancer in the brain.
So very interesting, because you bring up some really, really important points. First of all, you know, things that we can experience and, as you say, rationalize, because we're getting older. Sometimes you park your car, you forget where you park, things like that you sort of, as you said, you sort of rationalize or justify. But obviously things got to the point where you had it checked out, and he was diagnosed with this very, very rare form of cancer. Was there any physical pain? Did he complain of things that were happening physically with respect to headaches, things like that?
Yeah. Again, looking back on what was happening the year before, and I realized that he did complain of some headaches. I do remember that he had gone through a bottle of Advil. I remember that. Like, I thought, are we out of Advil already? And I didn't think of it at the time. I just thought, between he and I, or my parents who would come to visit, maybe we just all had headaches. But he did complain of some headaches. He complained of some extra fatigue. But like I said, those kinds of symptoms we could rationalize and justify based on growing older and working, and we tend to all do that, and he was a person that went to the doctor all the time. He got his yearly physical checks. He didn't hesitate to ask his doctor if he was feeling symptoms of his thyroid, because he did have a thyroid issue that he had been taking medication for, but he was really on top of that. And so it was really the last thing on our minds that he could have that kind of a diagnosis.
Which is interesting, because, not to broad brush, but many men aren't the best at getting them to have their physicals and to be on top of their health. So this is even, the irony is even more with a man that was on top of his health, got his physicals, and now ended up with this the glioblastoma. Can you tell me and describe, what was that conversation like when the doctor first gave you this report?
In the book, I write about it and how driving up to the hospital, we had to go to the brain tumor center, and all we knew at that time was that the neurologist had called and left a message on Sean's voicemail and said, get to the brain surgery center or the brain tumor center at St. John's right away, because you have some tumors in your brain. It showed up on the scan. And so that's what we knew driving to the hospital. And all kinds of things were going through my mind. And I had a colleague at the time who had had a tumor removed. So I thought, okay, if it's just that, we can just remove it. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of had that feeling of, we can fix it. I'm kind of that person where, okay, if there's a problem, let's find a solution. And so when we were sitting in the waiting room and the doctor came in and started talking about, okay, these are the lesions, da 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 da, and all of this language that was just not familiar to both of us, and we saw these big blobs on the screen, and we were just taken aback. Like we really were speechless at that point. And I remember the doctor saying, did your neurologist not talk to you about this? And I remember Sean and I were just sitting there going, no, and we were shaking our head. And so he apologized. He left for a while, and then he came back with the nurse and another doctor, and then kind of went through the beginning and talked about brain cancer and what they observed to be glioblastoma, and they told us that it was inoperable. And then we went through what the prognosis is for such a diagnosis, and we were just in disbelief, just in disbelief.
I can only imagine, Maria. At what point did you bring Gus into the conversation of what Daddy had and what he was going to be going through?
Yeah, that was a tough part. Sean and I wanted to make sure that Gus was not terrified about what was going to happen to us and to him. And so immediately after the diagnosis and the biopsy, we talked about getting therapy. And so we sought the help of a counselor. And I have to say that without her and the team that we have, we were then referred to another therapist who really focused on children, Betsy, who really helped us find the language to explain to a 3-year-old at the time what cancer meant and what treatments were going to be like. And so we really learned the tools to help a toddler understand um, what a brain cancer diagnosis is. Not only for him, but it was such a huge help for the both of us, for Sean and I. And I'm just, I, I just know that we couldn't have done it without their help.
So, Maria, this is a really good segue. I'd like to actually welcome and bring on Lauren Schneider. She is a licensed care social worker, but she specializes in children and grief, and she co-authored the book as well. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
So now we're on the topic of dealing with children and sharing this information. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you counsel children in this same situation?
Well, I'm actually the clinical director of the children's program at Our House Grief Support Center, which is a nonprofit grief support center serving Los Angeles. We have programs for adults and children. We don't do therapy, but we do grief support groups. And I've worked with grieving children for about 25 years, and I'm very well acquainted with Betsy, who was the therapist that Maria worked with, and that's how I got involved with Maria and her book project.
Lauren, I was wondering if you could maybe give us some tips on children and dealing with grief. I know a lot of parents like to shield their kids. Can you just maybe give us some tips on how to deal with kids and how they can get through such a difficult process?
Well, Maria had very good coaching all along the way from Betsy, and the book is a really good how-to guide for families with children, young children, and adolescents. And some of the main points that are emphasized are to include children from the beginning, to be very honest with them about the diagnosis and have an ongoing dialogue with them. So in an age appropriate way, of course, but so that they're not kept in the dark, and that they have opportunities to participate all along the way and get prepared for when there is a terminal diagnosis.
Yeah, Maria, in the book, I know one of the things that really jumped out was exactly that you included Gus from the very beginning, that you made sure that he understood as best as he could, as you say, Lauren, age appropriate, of what was happening to his dad and then what happened and how to deal with it. Very important that we all have a strong support system. Before we wrap up, Lauren, can you maybe give us some final words on how to get through a young child that's lost a mother or a father, and how to give them some hope so that they can lead normal lives and go on?
Well, I think the hopeful message is that that young children will survive this, and that they'll thrive, in fact, if they have a good supportive parent like Maria. And that the better the parent does, the better they are supported, the better the child is going to do. So it's a direct relationship that so the entire family needs to be supported. And a lot of times what happens is adults, they want professionals like myself to fix their children, because they can't stand to see the children in pain, when actually the whole family needs support, and they need to grieve together and learn ways to support each other and continue that dialogue. and then they can do really well and learn how to keep the connection alive, keep the memories alive, and like Maria and Gus too, Sean is still a very important part of their family, and that's actually good for their family, not to forget him, but to keep him.
Absolutely. Wonderful words. So, Maria, thank you for being such an example of showing us how to deal with children in such a tragic situation. So, I want to remind everyone the book is You Can't Do It Alone: A Widow's Journey Through Loss, Grief, and Life After. And if you can tell us, please, where our listeners can get the book.
Well, you can order the book at your favorite bookseller site. So that if that's Barnes and Noble, or one of my new favorite bookstores here in Los Angeles is the Last Bookstore in downtown LA. There's Romans. I know that Lauren likes to go to one in Brentwood. What's the name of that one, Lauren? I can't forget.
Diesel. Diesel, I said. Is it on Amazon? Is it on Amazon? It's on Amazon. Maria?
Yes, it's on Amazon as well. So your
wonderful.
favorite bookseller sites. Yeah.
Great.
I really hope it can help some people. I know that the journey that we took was a dark one and a scary one, and I hope it can help some of you.
And me too. Thank you so much for being on our show, to both of you. And thank you for your wonderful words. And I agree with you, Maria. I believe that your book is going to help a lot of people out there.
Thanks
you.
for having me.
Support for this podcast comes from Hasty Storytelling. Hasty Storytelling is a creative agency that specializes in production, brand strategy, and live streaming solutions. For more information, visit us at hastystorytelling.com. Health Journeys is produced by Victoria Bilionis and executive producers Dennis Lovelace and Greg Hasty. Finally, if you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, tell a friend, and visit us at hastystorytelling.com.